Hi, my name is Kelsey Bachali, and this is my presentation on Impala dietary migration as evidenced by Snapshot Safari. And I'm going to go ahead and turn my camera off for the rest of this. I just wanted to make sure it was evident that it was me. And let's get into this. So just some background to begin, impalas are a subcategory of antelope species that roams the Serengeti National Park. And these animals are herbivores, meaning that they are reliant on the park environment for sufficient foliage and shrubbery to keep themselves and their herds healthy. So, when the seasons change and the weather changes, what do these eating habits look like year round, and how do these seasons impact the migration of these animals? Just a little bit more background on the seasons in the Serengeti. We have two main seasons, which is the wet season and the dry season. The wet season occurs between November to April, and the dry season occurs between May to October. And these months that are right on the cusp, which are April, May, October, November, can be a little bit varied in terms of temperature and weather. The most important thing to note is that November and December typically have hot, short rains, whereas March to April have hot, long rains during the wet season. All of this information was sourced directly from the Serengeti website. So after that research and some of the stuff we talked about in class, my group posed the question, do the seasons impact impala migration? And we ultimately came up with the hypothesis that impalas are dietary migratory species, meaning that they move when their food or their resources move. And our prediction was that using Safari Snapshot, impalas are more likely to be photographed in grasslands during the summer, which is the green wet season, and in shrublands during the winter, which is the brown dry season. Our method was pretty simple. We conducted an observational study using the Snapshot Safari mega data file, which contained over 600,000 photos captured all across this grid system that you see in this photo to the right here. And we used three filters to narrow this down. The first was we filtered for impalas only, making sure that we were selectively researching for only this species. The second was we filtered for 1 year, and the year we selected was 2012 because we had a broad spectrum of data. And because we're looking at seasonal analysis, we only really needed January through December of a single year. And the last thing we filtered for was a specific camera in the park, which is right here in this red square, and it is camera H02. We chose this camera specifically because it's towards the middle of the top section of the park, of the Serengeti Park selection that was for the Snapshot Safari data. And in this way that we can look at our data and compare where impalas are at certain times of year, if there's more photos at this camera during a selective few months, and comparing that with greenness along down the road as well. So kind of bubbling off the back of this, this leads directly into our first set of data, which is the numbers of impalas at camera site H02 per month. And so this blue represents the amount of photos taken at this camera site for 2012. And right here, we're seeing we have a huge spike in photos between December to May, which is typically the wet season. So green, grazing on grass season in the safari or in the Serengeti. My apologies. So with this data, we're kind of able to interpret that in these warmer, wetter months, these impalas are more towards the northern part of the Serengeti, whereas we're not seeing very much data right here between June to about November. To piggyback off of that, these two photos come from the same bubble graph and are depicting the density of impala photos per month dependent on greenness. And this greenness is actually how dry the environment is. So we're seeing in this photo to the left in the month of May, which is represented in this 5 right here, there's a large density of impala photos taken when there is less dryness at hand, which goes hand in hand with that previous graph showing that during the month of May, more impalas are photographed in greener areas during the wet season, whereas this picture right to the right is exactly the opposite, showing less photos of impalas up in this northernmost area when there is less greenness in the month of October. So this kind of leads into the next slide, talking about how this helped us fail to reject our hypothesis and claim that impalas are dietary migrators. And how we can do this is that graph 2, which is this first graph on the left right here, illustrates that during the month of May, there's a significant amount of photos taken of impalas at a lower level of greenness than in this side over here. And this means that when, or a lower level of dryness, My apologies again. This lower level of dryness depicts exactly what we are looking for, and it helps us represent that this area up here is where impalas are spending their time in these wet months. It's much more green, wet, raining, and they're grazing on that grass. And then it leads us to be able to hypothesize and convince another study later on that they're spending those cold, cooler, dry months down here in the shrublands. And ultimately, this observational study proved to be in line with research that we established prior to support our claims, and helps prove that the Serengeti impalas migrate based off of resources as a consequence of weather, rather than just the weather itself. And then these next few pages are just sources cited. This is some background research we conducted. These are all the photos that we reused, and all of this was done in conjunction with BIO182, General Biology for Majors 2 at Arizona State University in fall of 2022.